Welcome to the Girl Dad Show.
Welcome to the Girl Dad Show, a professional parenting podcast. Each month, I interview entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals who are balancing parenthood, life, and profession in the hopes to learn what it takes to be an amazing professional parent. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Girl Dad Show. Today, I had Jen Ford on the show, and she is a dynamite. From acquisitions and mergers to running large-scale vacation rental companies, and then choosing to transition her professional career for her family and really taking these moments and sprints for work and family, she has a very unique perspective on life that I just absolutely admire and love. In a lot of ways, she's attributing these successes to her ability to do so, and I really think you'll enjoy her perspective, and I really do hope you enjoy this episode and show. Jen, thank you so much for joining me on my show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm super stoked to get to know you better. I feel like we've been crossing paths over the last few months through the Operators Guild and getting to know each other in Austin. And now I get to talk to you about something that I'm very passionate about, your professional journey and parenting. So it's going to be really great to unpack that today.
Love it.
Cool. So why don't we jump right in? Why don't you tell the listeners what you do for a living?
Okay. Well, I'm Jen Ford, and most recently I was Chief Commercial Officer and CFO at a property management company. So if you had a second home and you wanted to rent it out, we would take care of everything for you. That company was called Turnkey Vacation Rentals. And I worked there for 4 years. And then last spring, the company was acquired by a competitor called Vacasa. I stayed on to help integrate and then rolled out, and now I am an advisor who works mostly with founders and CEOs and their teams to help them elevate their execution, create org structure, and really help them solve some of the big challenges they have. So I think about it as strategic advising and really partnering with that team and almost being like a CEO extender for people.
That's awesome. And yes, I love that you did that because I have been dabbling in real estate over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And I'm very familiar with Vacasa, but I didn't know about Turnkey because I got into it too late. I think you guys were already acquired by that point. But it's a very fascinating space. It's a really, really interesting space. And it's just gone through so many changes over the last 10 or 15 years as I'm just getting into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great way to travel, right? I think it's not a new thing, but certainly Airbnb and HomeAway, now Vrbo, increase the propensity to use the services by aggregating so much supply and giving opportunity for travelers to find a place to book lots of different types of homes. For me, so travel is one of my passions. I just love to travel. You think about sort of my hierarchy of importance. It's like my family, and then next is my travel. Don't mess with my travel. And when I was young, I have a pretty big family, but there's 5 kids. And so you don't really fit into hotel rooms. And so we would stay in vacation rentals, and I made some of my best memories traveling on vacation. And so actually have worked in the travel space for over 10 years now. And, I think it's a great reason to get out of bed every day and go do your work to help other people create their memories of a lifetime. When we're old and we're looking back on our lives, I don't know how much we're actually going to think about the work we did, but I bet we'll be thinking about and telling stories about the vacations that we took with friends or family. And it was really special to be part of that and very motivating for me.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask, if you spent more time in the space or how you landed in turnkey rentals, because that kind of space is very, very unique. So you said you were always in it. So what did you do before that?
Well, so I actually spent the first 10 or so years of my career in high tech. And it was great. I was able to work internationally. I got good experience. I rotated around to lots of different finance roles. So it was a good foundation, but I never really connected with the product. And I was missing that connection and that excitement about what the company did. And so I had the opportunity to join this kind of small private company called HomeAway and to dive into the travel space. And it was at that point I realized how important that connection was for me. I love consumer brands. I love being able to think like the consumer and understand what that experience is like and then help make it better. So I got into it that way. So I actually was at HomeAway for about 5 years. before making a pit stop at a company called Snap Kitchen and then moving on to Turnkey. And it was a great 5 years at HomeAway because I was actually there for the IPO and part of that team, ran FP&A and then also investor relations for HomeAway, and then was very involved in the sale to Expedia. So I got to see a lot and learn a lot, which was a really cool experience for me. And then I took a stop at a company called Snap Kitchen. So when we talk through this, I'm in Austin, and so I've worked for quite a few Austin names. So if you're local, you definitely know about Snap Kitchen and HomeAway, and Turnkey was born here as well. So anyway, I took a stop at this company called Snap Kitchen, and honestly, that's where I learned to be a CFO. It's a tough business. It's food manufacturing, distribution, and then omnichannel, retail, wholesale, and digital sales. So very complex. You're dealing with perishable inventory. So it was just like the most intense job, but I feel like I learned in a year what it would have taken me 5 years to learn somewhere else. So definitely came out a better version of myself from that. And I think it set me up really well for joining Turnkey because it's also a relatively complex business. Hospitality is hard, and there are a lot of different touch points. And so you really have to understand how everything fits together and what the dependencies are. So I think, every step in your journey, hopefully you're learning something and becoming a better version of yourself. And I think those couple of roles were really important to set me up for success when I moved over to Turnkey.
Yeah, it sounds like you were just riddled with a ton of unique experiences that most people don't get to experience, kind of jammed into those, like even just those 3 companies. Getting acquired by Expedia is, I can't imagine that being also novel and amazing in its own right, just to get to experience what that looks like. And then the Vacasa acquisition and all this stuff sounds awesome.
Well, I've seen a lot. I mean, it's not always awesome, but usually, what I've actually found is that you grow the most during the uncomfortable times. And so I actually, whenever people ask for career advice, I tell them to do things that scare them a little bit, that they're really not sure if they're going to be successful or not. Because if you always do the things that are a slam dunk, you're just not going to grow as much as if you do things that will stretch you, make you uncomfortable, and make you try new things. And I started that from an early age. When I first graduated from college, I joined Dell, and another Austin-based company. And I sometimes I think I didn't even know to be scared, to be honest. I was like 22 years old and I didn't know a lot of things, but I asked for a transfer to Asia, and they said, and truth be told, I asked for that transfer because my boyfriend had moved to Asia, and I really wanted to just still hang out with him, but he's my husband now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I asked for this transfer to Asia. I didn't even think about it. I was just like, this sounds cool. Let's do this. And they said, there's not a position in Asia, but if you move to London, something might open up. So I'm like 22 years old, 23 years old, something like that. And I go do a 7-month assignment in Europe.
Oh.
It was
Awesome.
incredible. And then they call me up and they say, hey, there's a role in Asia. Would you like to relocate? And I did. And I had so many amazing experiences. One, I think leading earlier than I would have otherwise had the opportunity to, because I was sort of coming from the headquarters and had learned a lot that I could bring to my counterparts in the region. And then just culturally, I was experiencing so many different things. So it was so cool, but that's just one example. I really think you've got to do things that push you outside your comfort zone and allow you to try new things.
That's amazing. I love the idea of speaking up and asking. I definitely don't think I did that enough growing up in my professional career. And I think that's such a powerful thing because you never know if you don't ask. And, it's definitely like setting yourself up for success if you keep having that methodology of like just asking for things and trying things. So that's really brilliant. I do have one more professional question. How did you get what was the switch from CFO? Because it sounds like it was a pretty big financial track. And then you also did commercial. So where did the sales part come in?
Yeah. So, I think I've always been a person who maybe you would say I don't stay in my lane necessarily. What I would say is I really like to work cross-functionally. And I love to help elevate a company. And so for me, one of the most exciting things you can do to drive the business forward is really to understand the strategy and translate it to an operating plan, and then make sure that everybody in the company understands what their role in that plan is, and then has the access to information to understand, if they're on track to their targets, and of course, then to drive accountability as well. So I love doing that. And what I would say is that I've always been a person who works cross-functionally, and regardless if it's technically my role or not, I try to help solve a problem, create a solution, or move the company forward. And at Turnkey, I was doing a lot of that. I was doing all the traditional CFO type roles, but I was also doing a lot of things that you don't necessarily see on the resume. It was kind of like being the glue that helped hold the company together, and helping to rally employees around the North Star that we had, and to move the company forward. So I would just say it's really more about the fact that my responsibilities were broader than the typical CFO role. And as time went on, I kept taking on more and more. I had revenue management and business intelligence and HR and some of the other things that aren't always part of the CFO responsibility. And it was what excited me, because I like looking forward. I like driving the business. And so that role allowed me to kind of spread my wings and do more of that.
That's amazing. I love that. You're like a curious cat in a way, where you're just like, you have to like figure everything out and be that person that solves it.
That's a good point. And that is a lot of it. I am super curious. Like I like to think about things. I like to understand how things work. I think of my brain, that's going to make me sound like a CFO, but in my brain, like a lot of my processing is a lot like a spreadsheet. Like I want to understand all the drivers and the levers. And if I pull this lever over here, how does it cascade through the whole model? I mean, I really kind of think about a lot of things that way, is if I do this, then what happens? And if we do this, then what happens? And so, just really trying to use the way my brain works to help identify opportunities where we can go pull a lever and do something really big and exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then if I guess because I do have one more question about your work experience, then we'll talk about your kids. So I do have to ask, what made you not want to stay with Vacasa, and what was that transition like? If I could just be a little bit forward here, what made you take this kind of turn into just kind of coaching and advising?
Yeah, no, great question. Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I think from a professional standpoint, look, Vacasa is great, and there would have been a role for me there if I had wanted it, but it just didn't seem like the right next professional step for me. I have a lot of finance experience, but what gets me excited is more of the chief commercial officer, the COO, sort of the setting the culture and driving the business, which is a little bit different than most CFO roles. Not that you can't influence those things, but it's a little bit different. And so I just wasn't sure that I wanted my next role to be within finance. And so, that's one of the reasons. But then also, I had come off a long stint of intense working. Anybody who's run a high growth company knows that the executive level roles are really intense. And we had just led a travel company through a global pandemic. And so, that was a really challenging period of time, and it was the lowest of lows. We actually were at a point where we had virtually no revenue. But then we actually had the rebound where vacation rentals became the preferred way to travel during the pandemic because of the privacy and, your space and your ability to kind of isolate from others in place. And so we had massive growth, a few months after we had been in this kind of like holding pattern. So it was very intense. And then we went through a transaction. And if you've been through any kind of M&A process before, you know that due diligence is, it's something that takes up a lot of time. And you're still trying to do your day job because you can't take your eye off the ball on the day-to-day operations of the company. And so it was very intense. So I had a lot going on at work, super intense. And I also had a lot going on personally. My dad was very ill during this time. He was hospitalized for a very long period of time. And then my daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And, you know, when your kid is diagnosed with a chronic disease that's going to require them to be insulin dependent for the rest of their life, it's a shock to the system, and it's a lot to get used to. And, you know, I think I realized at that point that I just needed to take a break and sort of take care of my loved ones and, frankly, myself at that point, because I had been putting everyone else and everything else first. And I knew it was time to sort of hit the reset button. And so that's the main reason that I decided it was time for me to take a break, was that, you know, I just needed to reset. I needed to think about where I wanted to take my career. I needed some time off to take care of myself. And I wanted to be really intentional about how I spent my time going forward.
Wow, I love it. That's awesome. I think that's actually probably the hardest thing for most people to really recognize and do. So I think there's so much stigma around just like being able to say that you need to take a break from this to prioritize that, especially when it's related to work and family, right? And yourself and your mental health and your family's health and all of that stuff. So kudos to you for being able to make that decision for yourself. That's very, very amazing.
Yeah, and you know what I would say is, so I'm actually a big fan of, I call them life breaks. I think sometimes people will take a couple of weeks off between jobs, and look, like I realize if you're able to take longer, you're super fortunate, and not everybody can do that. But if you are able, having a more extended break to sort of lean into your passions or do something different, I think allows you to come back recharged and a much better employee in the long run. And so I've actually 3 times taken, you know, a longer break in between roles so that I could do some of those things. And the first time I did it, it was a little scary, right? I was just like, are people going to hire me when it's time to come back? And, you know, how are we going to pay all of our bills? But, you know, my husband and I have always really tried to live within our means and create a little cushion for ourselves. And so these breaks were pretty much life-changing. You know, we were able to do some really cool things. And so I think even if it is just the 2 weeks, any amount of time you can give yourself off, I think can be really helpful for your mental health and your well-being.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways, mathematically, you may be able to go back to a spreadsheet and like track it with other people that don't do that. But maybe that could also be one of the primary reasons that you have been able to grow your career so fast and so high, because you have been able to do more because you've taken those mental breaks. I don't know. Maybe there's a thesis there.
It's a great theory. I mean,
yeah.
You know, we don't know. I will tell you this. I think it makes me a more interesting person. Before my husband and I had kids, we had actually been living in Asia, and then we moved home. And I had traveled a lot for work, but it was really traveling for work where like there wasn't a lot of leisure happening. And we had seen just a little bit of all these cool places. And so, you know, we said, God, wouldn't it be amazing to just take some time off and travel before we have kids while we're still young. And I know we'll get into my family and my upbringing, but my parents were very like focused. They worked, they saved, just, you know, two earners and just a very traditional sort of background. And when I went to tell them that we were going to take time off and travel around the world, essentially, I was kind of worried what they would say. And my dad looked at me and he said, "You will never regret this." And he was so right. And it was also kind of a blessing for me that he, who was, you know, much more traditional and kind of stoic and hardworking, he recognized that these things actually enrich your lives in ways that a job may never enrich your life. And so, yeah, we've had a few of these opportunities to do some kind of cool things while we took a break from work. And yes, I have a lot to talk about when I'm in an interview, because you learn a lot from some of the things we did, especially for us. We love to travel, and so that was one of the main things we did. But, you know, learning to kind of roll with the punches, adapt to change, fit into different cultures, be empathetic to people, be understanding and open. These are all qualities that are really important for being a great leader and also for parenting. So yeah, love it.
Yeah, I love that. I also love traveling, and so I definitely love it for very different reasons. But I love that you just articulated it for those because it's absolutely true. You'll learn those core skills by just traveling to new areas that don't share the same values or even like the language or food or whatever.
Yeah.
But it does increase all these skills that you don't even think are transferable, but they're incredibly
They
transferable.
are.
That's beautiful. I love it. So let's talk about your kids. So talk to me about how many you have and how old are they?
Yes.
You talked about one, but would love to know more.
Yep, I have two daughters, one who's almost 13 and the other who is 15. So pretty much I've got two teenage girls. The one who's 13 or almost 13, she's pretty much been a teenager for the last few years as it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I have two teenagers.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I've heard that I love that you're a girl mom. That's great because I'm a girl dad, and you're going to be able to give me a lot of sage advice. But I've heard that the girls get harder as they get older, and then they get easier once they become an adult. What do you think about that theory or that is that a myth or is that true?
I don't know. I mean, they haven't, because I don't think I'm quite at the stage yet where maybe they sort of turn away from their parents a little bit. And I certainly don't know what adulthood is like. I'm trying to think back to my own teenage years, and it might have been a little bit true. I don't know. I just find that they're so different. They're each their own person, and what happens with one and what works with one is totally different than the other. I've got one sort of introvert, super studious child, and then I've got another who is extroverted, really empathetic and into her friends and caring, but not necessarily as interested in academics. And so like they're just like completely different, and that's part of what keeps it interesting, I think.
That is awesome. Yeah. I've like noticed that my girls are also starting to figure out their separation points. It's really fascinating to watch them grow up. I have a 3 and 5 year old, so they're super young, but it is really interesting to see how they grow up. Because in the beginning, even up until about 3 or 4 months ago, they basically did everything together, and my youngest would just do whatever the oldest did, and like the same things. But now you could start seeing the younger one kind of break out a little bit. It's pretty fun.
Are they friends? Do they play together?
Oh yeah, they're super close. It's just it warms my heart. It's like the best thing in the world. I love it. What do they think that you do? Do they know what you do for a living and kind of like the roles that you've taken? Like what's their awareness level of your career trajectory here?
I think it's more recent. My younger one has discovered Google, and she likes to Google me, and she'll be like, "Mom, you're getting more famous." Like, I don't really think that that's what that is. She's like, "But I saw like 10 pictures of you on Google." I was like, "Yeah, no, that doesn't actually mean I'm famous." I think that they understand, that I've been an executive at various companies. They're starting, now that they're older, right? They're starting to understand what that means and what I did. I think one of the big things is that they have learned. I think that they've seen like the hard work and the commitment from me, even though they didn't always understand like what I was doing or why I was doing it. In the sense that like they saw the long hours. They saw me not being there for all of their events, their school drop off and other things. And so I think they are aware of that. But I think they're just still kind of starting to understand, what is a CFO or what is a COO or a CCO. And so I think that's all still kind of foreign to them.
Yeah. That's got to be fun though, because they're obviously at the point where they're starting to think about like what they want to do, what their interests are, possibly even like what college they want to go to and what they want to study potentially, right? So it's got to be more fun to like talk to them about what you do. Because when I talk to my kids about what I do, they don't have a clue. And they always just say you push a lot of buttons and you talk to people. And it's like, yep, that's about right. But it's got to be fun to be able to talk to them and start kind of like showing them like what you do, right? And being able to kind of figure out what they want to do.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think it's most interesting to hear about what they want to do. I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned as a parent is that you can't have like a preset idea of who your kids are going to be. You really have to allow them to develop and explore and become, without influencing it too much. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's some very important things that we've tried to teach our kids, but I also don't want to push sort of my preferences, my values around work on them, meaning not values. That's probably not the right word. I think
I think I get what you mean, though. That's really interesting. So your kind of work ethic, maybe, or like the decisions you make at work, or
well, yeah, or my. So I guess what I mean is that like I'm super goal oriented. I've always wanted to take on a leadership position. I mean, even now, I'm just kind of like, boy, you know, I really want to be a CEO. I want to be able to experience that, and you know, I think it's okay if they don't want that, right? They may want other things. And so I think we kind of explore what they're interested in and what that might look like then for their job. You know, my youngest is super interested in reptiles, right? So it's like, okay, well, what kind of a role can you have, and what would day-to-day look like? And we try to expose them to some of those things so that they can get a better idea. My sister actually is an administrator at a zoo, and so she got us a behind-the-scenes tour so that Peyton could go in and see what the reptile handlers were doing day to day. And I just think it's important to foster what it is they're interested in, and to support sort of growing that versus, you know, me sort of saying, well, you know, you should want an executive level job, and you should, you know, like, I just think that that's sort of trying to define their happiness using my own personal set of values. And while of course we have certain family values, like, they still need to decide what it is that's going to bring them satisfaction and joy, right? So I think, you know, I think that's the balance you play. Now, don't get me wrong, like, there are certain things that we really think are important for them to understand. So like, I would say my biggest thing is like growth mindset. No matter what you do, I think it's important to think about it as a journey and to be a better version of yourself today than you were yesterday. And it's, you know, that kind of always keep learning. And that applies to any job. So not that we don't have values that we're trying to share with them. We certainly do. Growth mindset is one of them. My husband and I are very big on living within your means. As we talk about careers with them, we talk about the earnings potential of the various careers. I think that, again, it's possible that they're going to do something. I mean, maybe not only possible, but even probable that they're going to do something that has a different earning potential than what their parents do, right? And so it's not swaying them one way or another towards a career because of earnings potential, but it's helping them understand what that might mean in terms of lifestyle and trade-offs, and, you know, just kind of understanding pragmatically what it means if you choose certain careers. And so we have a lot of those kind of conversations, you know, and try to kind of help guide them without pushing them in a certain direction.
I love that. I'm totally going to take notes on that one and pull a page out of your book for my kids as they get older and start thinking about this. My oldest just started thinking about what she wants to do because they're starting to ask that at school, right? And so she's stuck on right now being a doctor, and she wants to be a doctor. And I'm kind of an entrepreneur, so I'm like, well, what do you think about like owning a hospital and hiring a bunch of doctors? And she has like no interest and obviously no comprehension of why that would be. So obviously I'll have to wait for a while to talk to her about the differences of that. But I struggle with like not pushing them into it, right? Because I want them to also be entrepreneurial, and it's like a battle all the time where I'm like, no, I can't like dictate their interest in their life. I gotta like slow it down. But luckily, I think I still have a lot of time before I have to like really like have those serious conversations and be a really good guide.
Well, it's exposing them, right? So I think it's important to expose them, but not necessarily lead them to an answer, right? And I think especially for girls, exposing them to things that aren't always the norm within our society, I think is fantastic. I think it's, you know, it's great. I actually, kind of on that topic of like, you know, when you're a girl dad, I think in my household, my husband and I were both, you know, I moved to Asia to be near the guy, right? And so we ended up moving home and getting married and all that. And I think when the kids were kind of like preschool aged, we were both like director level, both had global teams, and it was just that constant like juggling act of, it's go, go, go. It's who's traveling this week, who's traveling next week. There's a doctor's appointment. And so it's like, how do you make it all work? And, I think we were getting by, but it was like, there was no slack in the system. And then we had a series of events that taught us a very, very important lesson. And the first event was that my husband crashed his bicycle. He was out for a bike ride. He crashed and he had to have emergency surgery. And we were like, oh, wow, well, that's weird, but it's just a little bump in the road, no pun intended. And and then later that same year, my daughter had a seizure at school, and which was absolutely terrifying. But we spent the next like 6 weeks doing MRIs and seeing neurologists and trying to understand what was going on. And she was ultimately diagnosed with epilepsy, and we thought, okay, well, now we've got this under control and it'll be fine. And then a few months later, my other daughter fell off of a water slide and had to go to the emergency room and get 6 staples in her head. And
oh my gosh.
We were like, this isn't just a bump in the road. This is actually life. And life is always going to have these bumps in the road. And we need to create a life for ourselves that allows there to be some slack in the system so that we can handle these things that life is going to throw our way. And, again, I think we were in denial at first. We're like, no, this isn't going to happen again. And of course, that same thing might not happen, but like something will happen. We all are dealing with things. And so I think it was at that point that we decided to kind of reconfigure things a little bit. My husband said, I don't want to keep doing this whole shuffling when one of the kids is sick. I want to be able to coach soccer. And I said, I don't really want to do those things. And so my husband actually left his full-time position, which he generally liked a lot and was a great people leader and enjoyed it. But he decided to start a consulting business and limit his hours so that he could be around more for the girls and so that he could be the backstop at home. So he became the flexible parent. And I think that was 2 really important things happened when he did that. One is that I was able to lean into my career and our girls could see that. And 2, he was this male role model who was the room parent. He joined the school board. He became very involved at school, so the kids saw him. And not that there aren't other dads at school, but it is traditionally more of the moms who are showing up and doing a lot of those things in the classroom. I mean, my husband was there doing the bulletin board every month to make the new bulletin board in the hallway. He was doing all the things. And I think it was really powerful for our kids to see that dad was home more and more available, and that mom was actually leaning into her career and doing whatever I have done to get on Google. And so I think that one, I think it was an amazing sacrifice for my husband to make, but I also think it was really great that we had a conversation and he was able to say, these are the things I want. And I was like, I don't actually want to do those things. And we supported each other in those decisions, right? And so I think like it just made for a really great partnership and has allowed us to do many of these things. And, now I'm sort of slowing down a little bit and I'm more available to the kids, and he's very busy at work. And so I think there's an ebb and flow to a lot of things in life. And I think it's really important to make some of those adjustments, but ultimately to make sure that you create some slack in the system for the inevitable bumps that are going to happen in life.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that you're taking all of these like lessons and you're learning from it. So you're like literally role modeling what the growth mindset means, not just professionally, but also personally. That's fantastic. I like that you're pulling these kind of, they're not mundane by any means because those are serious situations, but for the most part, they're things that happen, but you're basically looking at it and trying to like process it for your family and learn from it and optimize for it. So that's amazing. And so the question I have for you here is, when you think about parenting and what success looks like, is that really it? Like offering them like this, maybe I'll just open-ended ask you instead of trying to paraphrase it, but I think we're pretty close to understanding like how you're qualifying it, or at least it's a big evolution.
Yeah, I think that mindset, that I think a lot of parenting is about helping your child embrace the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Because if you have a growth mindset, it's not about getting to a certain end place. It's about the journey. It's about learning and improving and growing. And you can do that no matter what you do professionally. You can do that if you're a stay-at-home parent. You can do that if you don't have kids. You can do that if you're an executive. You can do that if, whatever it is. That growth mindset, I believe, will serve you very well in life and will keep you curious and interested about the world around you. And so I think instilling that mindset is probably one of the most important things we can do for our children. And frankly, it's not up to us to decide what they are going to be when they grow up, or where they're going to go to school, or any of those things. I feel like it's their life. Those are their decisions. It's our job to help, give them the tools in the toolbox to get wherever it is they want to go and to enjoy that journey. And I think you'll be much more likely to do it with a growth mindset.
Yeah, that's awesome. How are you navigating your professional career and trajectory? Thinking about, parenting and being there for your kids, and then, taking these baton tosses with your husband and what you want for them versus what you want for yourself. Because it's really crazy what you have achieved. And I agree with your daughter. I think you are really cool. And it takes a lot of sacrifice and work to get to that level. But it also takes a lot of courage and time to, offer your kids a growth mindset and be there for them and be a great parent. So how are you navigating that?
Yeah.
That decision for your work, and what's next for you?
Yeah, well, honestly, in a lot of ways, I didn't know what growth mindset was until several years ago. And I would say that early in my life, I was actually a bit of a perfectionist. I had a more fixed mindset where I felt if I wasn't immediately good at something, I was never going to be good at that. And it was really through work that I learned, no, it's more about the sort of practice and trying things and then getting better. Nobody's an expert on day one. And I was fortunate to work with mentors and managers and leaders who helped me understand that and supported me in my growth. People always ask, what's your biggest failure? I don't think about most things as failure. I do think about mistakes and what you learn from them. And if you're making mistakes and learning, that's winning. I just, and so I think just having a different mindset about it. But, I would say, how do I make the decisions, or how have I haven't always made the right decisions. That's the thing. I mean, I think this is part of what leadership is, by the way, is that it's not about always being right. It's about knowing that you have to make a decision, and knowing and feeling and believing that it probably will work out. And it may not work out immediately, or it may not work out how you exactly thought it would, but it's knowing that you make a decision, you see what happens. If you don't like the result, you pivot, you make a different decision, and it ultimately, most things do actually work out in the end. And I think that that's true for your career as well, right? I can't say, I look back on my career, I definitely made some missteps. I joined some companies where, it wasn't the right fit culturally, and maybe I stayed too long, but there's learnings in that as well. And it always made me better prepared for that next role. And I always looked for roles where I felt I would come out a better version of myself on the other end, which I think ultimately is what the growth mindset is all about. I'm not trying to be a better Young, I'm trying to be a better Jen, and I think I just want to be a better version of myself. I still might not be the very best CFO out there. It's not about that. It's about my own journey and growing as an individual and being open to trying new things and putting myself out there.
Awesome. I love it. That's a good way to measure success in business. I think that's really, really sage. And it's really hard to do that. And I think it's super important that we do talk about that concept more and more, because I feel like the culture and society we live in right now is so much so about like comparing and benchmarking versus, what you want and what makes you happy. And I will say that I'm still struggling with that a lot, and I think I've only come to that realization like a year or two ago where I just like, I actually like, I actually don't really care anymore. Or at least that it's like genuinely like my care for it is decreasing a lot. It's really about like, for me, obviously my goals are a little bit different than yours, it sounds like, but it's really about like satiating different things that make me happy versus like what the world says that I should have or shouldn't have, or the society says I should have or shouldn't have. And it's been unbelievable. Like it's actually, to your point, it's been yielding much more success for me just because I think I actually mean it and want it.
Yeah, because I think it's authentic. It drives you, and people can see the authenticity come through, right? And versus if you're doing things because it's what you should do or what someone else wants you to do, that's not really driving your own happiness. And I don't know. I don't know if it's like, I mean, I'm sure some people get this at a much earlier age. Maybe I'm slow. It took me till midlife to really better understand all of these things, but we're sort of a product of our upbringing, and I had a pretty traditional upbringing. I mean, both my parents worked, but they stayed at the same company for a long time, had very steady careers. And so I had to kind of create my own path in that, like, there wasn't someone who had gone into business, especially the corporate world, that I could emulate within my kind of core family. And so it was just, there's a lot of trial and error. And I learned that, well, actually, trial and error works pretty well in a lot of cases. You try things. If you like them, you keep doing them. If you don't like them, then you do something else. I mean, it sounds a little overly simplistic, but there is some of that to it, right?
Totally is. Jen, this is awesome. I really appreciate you unpacking your philosophies and all your learnings. This is really great. I do want to make sure I'm cognizant of your time, so I'm going to switch over to some of my rapid fire questions that I like to ask every guest, so there's some commonality to each episode. What advice do you have for other parents and soon-to-be parents?
I would say it's what we talked about, right? I think you have to guide them, but don't lead the witness. Allow them to explore and figure out who they are, and enjoy that process with them. It's really exciting to kind of understand how they think, how they approach things, and what gets them excited. But don't try to push your own preconceptions on them.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm definitely taking notes on that one right now. So
can I do another one?
Yeah, please.
So I think that this is specific. It's to any parent, but I think it happens to working moms a lot more. And that is that no good comes from working mom guilt. I was really fortunate in that when my first child was born, I actually stayed home for 6 months. And I remember that about 6 weeks into it, I was like, whew, man, I can't imagine sending her to daycare. And then after about 12 weeks, I was like, I don't know, maybe some time at daycare would be okay. And literally at, 4 months, I was like, okay, I got to go back to work. I can't do this anymore. I just, I wasn't happy. I was kind of handing my baby off to my husband as soon as he got home from work. I still wanted to hang out with all my work friends. And I think I was fortunate in that it allowed me to realize I was going to be a better mom if I was doing things that made me happy. And so yeah, like I feel like I didn't have the working mom guilt, and I meet so many women who have that guilt, and I just think, let it go. It's not improving things. It's not making you happier. It's not making your child happier. You do your best, and you be okay with it. If you don't like what's happening, change it, but lose the guilt.
I love it. That's amazing advice. I completely agree with you, and such a powerful message. Thank you for articulating that. We're totally going to make that into a TikTok and like totally blast that. That's awesome. If you can go back and tell yourself one thing before having kids, what would it be?
I think I would just tell myself that you're going to not love, maybe that's not the right word. You are going to appreciate every moment. People say, what's your favorite age? I have loved every stage. I just, you know, I've been through some pretty tough things. I have a daughter who has a chronic disease. My other daughter has epilepsy, which fortunately she has a type that children tend to outgrow. So it's not something that continues to be an issue for her, but we've gone through some pretty tough things, and I feel like I was made to be their mom. I just feel like we were perfectly matched to go through this journey together, and I think those times were very difficult, but also just so gratifying to know that I was able to be there for them and to help them through that. So, I think it's just been, even the tough times, I've really appreciated every single part of raising these wonderful human beings.
It's awesome. And then you're kind of answering this one a little bit by the last one, but I'm still going to ask in case it's something different. But what's the most surprising thing that you learned about yourself after becoming a parent?
I think I'm actually more patient than I thought that I would be. We didn't talk about this too much, but I actually think there's a lot of parallels between parenting and being a leader. And I think as I become a better leader, I become a better parent, and vice versa. But I think that I have more patience at home than I have at work. And so I think it kind of surprised me that I was as patient as I was with the kids. But again, I think much of it is tied to that. I'm able to appreciate every moment, and even the tough ones, which allows me to sort of keep my cool through even some of the most difficult of times with the kids.
I love that. And what is your all-time favorite business book?
So it's actually my all-time favorite business book and parenting book. And it's called It's called Mindset. It's by Carol Dweck, and it is a book all about creating that growth mindset. And she talks about how mindset impacts parenting, coaching, managing, and so it actually applies to every facet of your life. And so it's really hands down one of the best books I've ever read. It helped me more formally change my mindset from sort of like that fixed perfectionist mindset that I had as a young person to becoming this much more growth-minded person. And it's a quick read. It's an amazing book. It honestly changed a lot of things about my life.
It's awesome. Thank you for that. I got to go check it out. Yeah, I'm always looking for new books to read, and that sounds like a great one. And then Jen, last question: when you're not being a super mom and thinking about the next trajectory of your professional career, what do you do for fun? What's your downtime stuff?
Oh, well, I'm into art, so I love to do photography. I love to travel. Travel is just like the thing that keeps me going. I love planning that next trip. I love taking the trip. And, now that we have the kids, we've just had so many wonderful opportunities to expose them to this passion that my husband and I share. And I love seeing the world through their eyes now. So, we've taken them internationally and around the U.S., and it's just been fantastic to share something that all of us are so interested in.
I love it. Well, Jen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. I really, really appreciate it. It was wonderful getting to know you a little bit better today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Young.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Girl Dad Show. Please take a moment to follow us on social media. You can find us at The Girl Dad Show on all major platforms. We look forward to staying in touch and keeping you up to date with all the new guests that are coming out.